Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shma. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, who looks like he's from Long Island right now, right?
I
Rabbi
am.
Malinowski in New York City on Sheikh Chesed. Great to see you guys. We are recording this on the day before the end of camp, and by the time that people listen to this, the summer will be over for them. I know how difficult that is. What a very complicated set of emotions those last days are. And the first Shabbat back is always a very, very difficult time. But we're adjusting to it, and we have an amazing Parsha. Parasha Ekev is our Parsha this week, which gets its name from the first uh, words, V'haya Ekev Tishme'un. If you listen. And we're going to talk about that theme a lot here. What happens and what kind of world are we constructing in which uh, things are given to you if you listen, if you obey, if you hearken? But we should just talk for a second about some of the more quotable verses in this parsha. People would recognize this verse, for example. Ki Adonai Elohecha miviacha el eretz tova. God is going to bring you into a good land. Eretz nachale mayim, a land of streams, ayanot, fountains, toamot, cisterns, or what, gushing things.
Aquifers, yeah.
Yotzim babikau vahar, coming out of the valley and the mountains. And now, Eretz chita usora, land of wheat and barley. Vegefen uteina v'rimon, vineyards and figs and pomegranates. Eretz zet shemen udvash, a land of olive oil and dvash. Honey, in this sense, is not bee honey, right? It would be date honey. Eretz asher lo b'miskinu tochav alechem, a land that you're not going to have to work hard to get bread out of. Lo techzar kolba, a land that you will not lack for anything. Eretz asher avana barzel mahara techzov v'choshet, your land will be where the stones are iron and the hills and the mountains are copper. That is the classic description of the land. So much art depicting that. And that's the quotable quote of the first part of this parsha. Any reactions to that?
Just one in English, even one more, far more quotable. Ki lo alechem levado yechya adam. Man does not live by bread alone. That comes from our parasha.
And then, of course, it leads into kakatu v'achalta v'savata uverachta et Adonai Elohecha al haaretz hatova asher natan lach. You will eat and you will be satisfied and you will bless the Lord your God on the good land. And so,
The Bible is one of the things that's on the Torah's mind here. This is a big theme in Deuteronomy, and exactly instantiated in this passage that you just read, and as it goes on, is if you are like the Torah wants people to be, wants the Jewish people to be successful, to work, to build. You're not supposed to just sit there and wait for God to give you things. You are supposed to be a co-creator in the world. But when you do that, you feel real powerful, then you don't feel gratitude. And that's a big problem. It's a big spiritual problem. And that's this passage, and as instantiated in us saying Birkat Hamazon, is all about saying, look at this wonderful world and feel grateful for it because it is a gift. And so this great land with those seven kinds of foods and the copper and the iron, it's a great land. But don't think that it's because you're so. Don't kochi be'etzem yadi. That I did all this by myself. That's what you can't think.
do other peoples have this kind of relationship to their land? And
Native Americans.
Native Americans have this experience with the land. I think
I think so. I think that there's a sense that what we do is not only for ourselves and not only represents ourselves, but also speaks to something larger, right? So in Birkat, we're not just eating for ourselves. We're not just enjoying the fruit of the land that we farm. We're experiencing the entire gift of the land. I think, I mean, I'm no expert, that there's something similar in Native American culture because they have a special relationship with the land, which comes up, every now and then when early Native American cemeteries are discovered on land that the European settlers have used for other purposes.
I want to ask this question because we all live, in highly urbanized environments, and we have to go a little bit of distance to get out into the land and to see the land at least, and to experience it. None of us farm the land, although I do have some basil growing out in my. uh,
That always reminds
Did
me
you
of the
did you buy
first
one?
Zionist Congress.
Did you buy it in the grocery store? Like it's a thing of basil. It just comes in
I
in the
have
little plastic thing.
basil in a
He
pot.
planted the plastic.
You planted the plastic
And
pot.
my herbs grow. I'm farming herbs outside my kitchen. Okay, that's about it. All right. The point is that you know, I mean, and I'm saying this because it's the summer, and I'm out on the bike a lot, and we live in a beautiful country. The country's beautiful, especially when you get to see it close. When you see, and I'm wondering to what extent that idea, our ability to react to land. Barry, when I was out in Lancaster last week visiting you, I went to see, the Susquehanna. It's amazing.
A
It's really
majestic
America,
river.
America is a really beautiful landscape, and there are, here in the East, Appalachia, Hudson Valley. These are just beautiful. And then last summer I was out in uh, Sedona, Arizona. Oh my goodness, the desert and the mountains were just spectacular. But we want to make an observation that our Israeli brothers and sisters have, um, you changed. I think actually realized the Jewish connection to a particular plot of ancestral land that is, I think they've realized something closer to the Torah's vision of really, really, really knowing and loving the land. And the Hebrew phrase is Yidiat Haaretz, which
Yatar.
connotes both knowing a lot about it, knowing a lot about the flora and fauna, and but also just loving it. Um, and a lot of them are farmers, or at least in the early 20th century, aspired to be farmers and wanted to be farmers.
I think in Israel, of course, it's much smaller, and you literally can go through different kinds of geological regions and geographical regions, in the space of half an hour. Whereas here, it's much more difficult to do that. I mean, in Canada, I grew up in a city where you literally drove 10 minutes and you were out in the wilderness after that, and that was a large city, Ottawa. I mean, and you're in forest and forest and forest. It goes on for forever, and lakes and lakes. And
So there are a lot of places like that in the United States as well.
course,
What I wanted to suggest, though, is that the whole thrust of Western civilization, as it came to me many years ago, was urbanization and alienation. That we have become more and more packed into cities, and as a consequence, we're not only alienated from other people, loneliness is a serious issue, but we're also alienated from the land because we no longer, you're the one person among the three of us who actually grows something on land. Most of us don't, right? We think of food as something you get at the supermarket, not something that you have to work to grow and you have to cultivate and love, right? The image I think most of us who are not farmers have of farmers is someone with a real love of the land and what the land can produce, which we don't really have.
so
You
it's
know, I
interesting.
just think
That the theme of the land is really important in this parsha. Go to the end of the parsha in chapter 11, verse 10. It's ki aretz asher taba shama lerishta, the land that you're going into, namely the land of Israel, lo keretz Mitzrayim. It's not like the land of Egypt, asher yitzata misham, that you left. In other words, this whole idea of the contrast of the geography, the geographical contrast between the land of Israel and the land of Egypt, where the land of Egypt is irrigated by the Nile, and it's the seasons that really influence agriculture. It's the breadbasket of the ancient world. Israel is not The land of Israel is not. Um, it's not a function of a river. It's a function of its relationship to heaven, which I think shapes the way that people relate to heaven. It's that all of our sustenance is dependent on rain, and rain only comes in its season, and therefore we need to live in this land properly. Otherwise, the rain won't come in its season, right? We are basing our entire experience in the land not only in terms of its wonder and its productivity, but also in terms of in contrast to the land that we just left, right? And let's talk about this for a second. About it's reflected in the second paragraph of the Shema, which is part of this parsha. Vayayim Shemot Tishmu al mitzvotai. People will recognize it if they recite the Shema. If you hearken to the mitzvot, V'haya im Shemot Tishmu al mitzvotai. If you listen to the mitzvot, Asher Anochi mitzavetchem hayom, that I command you this day to love God, to serve God with all your heart and with all your life, your soul. And then what happens? V'natati metaretzachem b'ito yoram kosh. I will give the rain in its season, and you will reap your harvest. V'safta de'anecha tiroshcha v'yitzarecha. Your grain, your wine, and your oil. Okay, so let's stop there. This is a kind of the theology here is, if you do this, if you serve God, if you love God, you're going to get the rain in its season. You're going to get all the blessings. And if you don't, you're not.
Mhm.
So my question to you both, does this work? Does this theology work? Or maybe, how do you react to this theology? Or if someone came to you in your different, circles and said, look, I love God. I serve God. I keep kosher. I do Shabbat. I'm blameless. And yet all these terrible things have happened to me, and it doesn't say that. The second paragraph of the Shema says that if I do it, you're going to take care of me. And my life experience is not. What do you say?
Yeah. Well, first of all, obviously, there's I use the term, I'll use the term orthodoxy here, not to mean Orthodox Judaism, but like there's a religiously ordered way of looking at the world. God in his heaven and all is right with the world, and good stuff happens, and God is like, I mean, Freud just, mercilessly mocked this kind of view of religion. It's like, it's just, projected wish fulfillment. You just want a big gigantic parent in the sky to take care of you, punish you if you need it, but really take care of you and reward you. And obviously, sensitive, perceptive people, as long as there have been people, have wrestled with these things. And the Talmud, which is an Orthodox book in its own way, also includes one voice which says, "Schar mitzvah b'hai alma leka." There is no reward in this world. It's why Olam Haba actually works as part of a whole religious system, because there's some deferred, other world in which all the wrong things get made right. If somebody came up to me and said, I could imagine somebody coming up to me and saying in frustration, the Torah promises me something, and that's not what I feel that I can hope for. That somebody come to me and say, look, this religion that you're teaching me is just not true. And I'm not really prepared to, religion, one thing religion does is teach us what to hope for. And you're telling me something silly to hope for. Or it could be somebody in their own, on their own lives, these things have been described. Obviously, the 20th century saw the greatest crime humanity's ever known, and lots of those people were believing, practicing, faithful, loving, serving Jews, and it can be true in micro for all kinds of people in our congregations or our communities, but certainly it was true macro in the Shoah. I would somebody come to me in frustration, I would say that this kind of order, take care of me, reward in this world with rain, it's not really speaks to me in a practical way. I don't really think this is the way the world is organized. I do think that we can still find it meaningful to know that the life of mitzvot and the life of faith and the life of service is its own reward. That's what I feel in my own
It's
life.
yeah, it's a hard question, and in a way, what you're saying is, I mean, and it's hard to talk about this in the abstract, because when a person comes to us, and how many people have come to us with these kinds of questions, we're talking to the person, and it's like that. There's a lot of pain there. And I say I listen to that question as an expression of the brokenness, right? I want to say, life's been cruel to you, life's been unkind to you, and that's what we need to deal with. Barry, you're going to jump in.
So it's important to understand the idiom, I think. So Jeremy likes to say that religion is poetry, not prose. And I think that we have to distinguish Israel from Egypt. In Egypt, the Nile is the great power. And the person who farms in Egypt is a cog in the wheel, so to speak. They're replaceable. In a slave economy, slaves are always replaceable. That's why we don't think of them as human beings. But the image that we're supposed to take away from Vahaya and Shemoah is that you matter, that the fate of your land and your world depends on you, because you are not replaceable. You are unique. And while I think some of us are willing to jettison the quid pro quo that if we do mitzvot, the rain's going to come, I don't know that that's necessarily what the Shma is saying here. It's not that if you do mitzvot, the rain will come. It's that the way you live your life is of ultimate importance, and you're not supposed to screw up.
So,
You're supposed to.
we talked. Mordechai Kaplan, founder of Reconstructionism, in his Siddur, I think he deleted this paragraph.
He did. He was looking to shorten the service a little bit.
Well, he actually replaced it with another pass. I think he had some of the Vayam Shmo, but he cut other parts. But he did replace it with something else, so he didn't shorten anything.
So,
So I think
I want to
you
say,
know
I have so much respect for him, in the sense of he struggled a lot with these kinds of questions, and he needed to demonstrate a certain intellectual rigor and honesty. And I give him, I mean, there's something to appreciate in that. On the other hand, I want to say, it's like, it's of course we know it's more complicated than that. Of course we're not literalists. Of course, we don't read this and think about it. And of course, I would use this set of metaphors, which is, the there are so many frequencies with which we are oscillating, and there's so many frequencies in the universe. Just your radio has so many frequencies. Couldn't it be possible that a human being relates to God on different frequencies also? And couldn't it be that yes, there is a literal way of reading this, which kind of makes sense in the way that I think, Barry, you're interpreting, which is, I'm accountable, and yeah, the people's living on the land is dependent on my moral behavior, full stop, right? That's what's being demanded of us here. On the other hand, it's more complicated than that.
But by the way, I just want to say about this conversation that we're having. And Barry, I'm glad that you use my little slogan there. At its best, it's really inadequate to approach a poem or poetic stuff with the simple, brittle question of, do I agree with this or do I not agree with this? I think that's just shallow. And in fact, you want to ask yourself what it might mean to you, what are the nuances, what are these different frequencies. And this is why I like studying Torah. And I think Torah actually demands that we not ask brittle questions about, do I agree, yay or nay, but what might it mean? And I think, with all humility, the three of us do a good job of asking.
I think so. No, and of course we're all on our different frequencies too.
But another thing I was going to say, by the way, about again, to pick up on Barry's comment about how this talk about the ultimate responsibility of all people is just screaming out in 2022. that your behavior affects the rain in an environmental way. There's this massive article in the Times about this projected, they call it mega storm, that sometime in the next blah 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 years will swamp California and swamp it, like a level of rain, a Noahide rain. It's Mabul, and it's going to gather from the Pacific. And when and if that hits, California's system of dams is in real trouble. And you know,
Would some
I do
people
think that
see that as punishment for, I don't know, bad television? I don't know.
so I do think that this quid pro quo from God, do mitzvot and I'll make it rain. Okay, not adequate as an explanation, but
I want to add one other point here.
your behavior is going to affect rain and land's fertility and all the above.
So I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination on Egypt, but one of the things that strike me is that Egypt was a kingdom of subjects, and Pharaoh was distinguished not only because he was a pharaoh, but because many times Pharaoh became God, putting a further distinction between him and the people that he ruled. What Vahayam Shemo is saying is that you have a relationship with God, that God listens to you and watches you, and you affect God. And that, I think, is a powerful message even today. That, in other words, God is not distant, beyond us totally, but what we do can have an effect on God, and God will respond.
Well, what about the idea also? I think it's an associate idea, which is you're living on the land as a privilege, and it can be revoked. And we who live in the United States, we tend not to think of our lives on the land in any form of conditionality, right? Especially moral conditionality. We think of like, yeah, so we live here, we're not going to get booted out here. I mean, but you know, there are tremendous responsibilities for living in a society, and not that the land will spit us out, which is what Deuteronomy says elsewhere. Actually, no, it says it here. Shamar lechem pen yiftel levavchem. You may take heed. V'charaf Adonai b'chem. God will be angry. B'atzar d'shamayim. No, it says right. You will be lost. You will be lost. I don't think anybody thinks in those terms outside of the religious context, right?
Yeah, I think I think that there's a certain kind of critique of the state of Israel, and I once saw a video. The religious philosopher Yeshaya Leibovich went to a settlement. This must have been in the early '80s. A settlement in the Shomron, or the Gush Emunim kind of settlement, and told them the land doesn't belong to them. And they were Talmidei Chachamim, and they said, "Excuse me, sir, but you know that the first Rashi in the Torah says, that the reason Reshit says because you need to establish God created the world and God can allot it to the people, and God allotted this land to us. I got rid of the Canaanites and I brought you in." And he said to them, "But you didn't finish that Rashi, which says, and if your moral behavior is not worthy, I will take it from you." And it was enormously, as Yeshaya Leibovich was, enormously fearless in what he said to people. He did not care who he offended, and I was very impressed with his bravery. So I do think that we do have a language. Of course, the Torah means it in terms of conventional behavior, and specifically the sexual behavior of the people. That's the ways of the Canaanites before you. But I also think that in a very naturalistic way, you can describe societies that go wrong, and then they lose their purchase. They lose their stability.
And so this piece of text lives in our lives, and so we recite it daily, and I think if we pay attention to these words, we're always kind of thinking about these things. We're thinking about our accountability. We're thinking about the way we connect to God. Maybe just if we could just dial back to one salient thing with which we will conclude our conversation. Back in chapter 10, verse 12, um, we have this. I think it's a huge pasuk, because it's one of those verses in the Torah which kind of helps you encapsulate what's the Torah about, and then we'll react to it, which is V'ata Yisrael. And now he's saying, here, like, and now Israel, which is, and now Barry Chesler, and now Jerry Koloski, and now Elliot Malamet. Ma Adonai Elohecha shoel me'emach. What does God ask of you? Ki im liyira et Adonai Elohecha. But to revere the Lord your God. Lalechet b'chol derachav, to walk in his ways, lava oto, to love, be loyal to him, lavod et Adonai Elohecha, to serve God, b'chol avecha b'chol nafshecha, etc., etc. That's what God wants. So it's the question is put very simply to us. What does God want from you? What does God desire from you? And it's interesting that Micha has another answer. The prophet Micah has another answer to this. And I suppose we could all give answers to this on some level. But here's one expression of the answer, which is, hey, what does God want? God wants you to revere. God wants you to do the mitzvot. God wants you to be loyal and to serve God with all your heart and all your soul. Full stop. Okay.
And that's it.
And
Oh, what do I ask? Just total devotion, love and fear, do all the commands. That's it. That's all I ask of you.
But it's a particular kind of total devotion, because what we have here are two poles. On one pole, we have Yirah, fear, which we associate with a kind of submission. And on the other hand, we have Ahava, love, which connotes intimacy. And as we live our lives with God, sometimes we are more drawn to the Yirah aspect, and sometimes we're more drawn to Ahava. And the verse comes to remind us that it's not either or, it's both and. That sometimes one will be more dominant than the other, but both are necessary. You should never get so far into one that you lose sight of the fact that the other is of vital importance.
in light of that, and I've been translating also Ava as loyalty, and because for so many people, the idea of loving God is so complicated. It's so difficult. But the idea of loyalty and the idea of being fiercely loyal, despite the fact that I may not necessarily have a sense of intimacy with God, actually may make some sense. That is, I will do what you ask me to do out of a sense of my loyalty to you. I'm not emotionally involved. I'm not emotionally attached necessarily. I don't feel like you're hugging me and kissing me, but I do feel an intense degree of loyalty to you, simply because this is who I am, and I was born into this people. In other words, and we've said this elsewhere, which is God is loyal to our ancestors. God loved, God loved Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's a very, God has a special connection to them, and we're their descendants. So we have this reciprocal obligation to at least have our loyalty in return. Does it work that way? Is it that simple, or more complicated than that?
You're always going to have a good. You're always going to. If the answer is it's more complicated than that, it's always going to work. But this little package of verses, which is chapter 10, in that 12, 13, 14 through about 20. Is really extremely rich. It includes that phrases which we mentioned, which appears in the Amidah, El Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanorah, God the great, mighty, and awesome. And in it also, there's another line which is very influential in Christianity. Umaltimet or lat lebavchem.
Yeah.
You shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. And the idea is something like, it's a little bit different on the penis, but that there's like something covering it, and you got to strip away this cover which prevents you from being your full self. And Paul, in the Christian scriptures, will take this and say, the real circumcision that matters is not the flesh but the heart. And it's hard to disagree. It's easy to disagree that it's the only one that matters, but it's impossible to disagree that it does matter. It does matter a lot to soften up the heart and to open the heart and to expose the heart. And I think that's I think that these opening chapters of Devarim, Va'etchanan and Ekev, before the laws really get laid out, last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha, I think are about opening up your heart to the relationship. And then I'm going to tell you what I need you to do. And there's going to be a whole lot more of the specific chukim umishpatim, the sort of manifestly religious stuff and the social equity stuff. But before you do that, you got to expose your heart. And so I really find this quite moving.
So interesting, the whole idea of cover and uncovered, unveiled and unveiled. I mean, it goes back to Moses, and you recall when Moses comes down the mountain, the people can't look at him, and they force him to put a masveh on him, and a veil. He's wearing a veil, which is why the Michelangelo statue is just so not doesn't depict it properly. The people can't look at him, and there's a barrier, and in a sense, we're always dealing with these kinds of things. I sometimes think of the curtain of the ark. We're moving slowly towards the Rosh Hashanah, and there's so much ark opening, ark closing, and it's like, what's that about? It is about umaltem. It is about removing barriers. We do cover, we do need to protect. We do, there is a membrane over the heart called the pericardium, which it's there to protect the heart. Okay, and I guess people in antiquity must have known that they certainly slaughtered enough animals to see that kind of thing, but and you don't want to not have a pericardium. You really want one. However, sometimes you have to, you have to do it. Well, let's have a last word, Barry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm struck by this image of opening the ark. And when we open the ark, I think we're looking for intimacy, that we're approaching God. And even though we're struck, especially on the high holy days when the Torahs are dressed in white with an element of Yirah, we are going to take the Torah out and touch it and dance with it and walk with it because we do love it. It doesn't remain something that we're fearful or struck by awe completely, but we have an avenue in which we can embrace it. And that's so critical to religious life.
Absolutely. Connection, the
Well
relationship, and the feeling of cleaving to it. And that's where we will draw our conclusions at the end of this amazing parsha, a parsha which has really at its core, ledafka bo, to connect, to be cleaving to God, right? In last week's parsha was Atem Advekim Barona, you who cleave, and that is reflected and demonstrated in so many different ways, which we are so fortunate and happy that you have cleaved to us over the last 35 minutes, and we really appreciate it. And now, of course, we're on Spotify, right? You can find...
No, we're on Spotify?
We're on Spotify, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And YouTube and Facebook and SoundCloud and everything, everywhere you get, well, not everywhere, but we'll soon be everywhere.
Well, is that thanks to Avi Chesler?
It is.
Thank you, Avi Chesler.
We will see you next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Take care.